Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking precious time out of your schedule to be here today. We greatly appreciate it. My name is Jonathan Allan. I'm a director in the Enterprise Strategy team. What on earth is the Enterprise Strategy team? Well, I've been at Amazon 8 years. Before that, I was privileged to spend nearly 20 years working at Capital One Bank. In my final role as a Chief Technology Officer for one of the divisions, as Capital One moved its entire banking infrastructure into the cloud. I learned a lot of lessons on that journey. In fact, I didn't have grey hair until I'd finished that journey. And actually sharing the lessons learned of that journey over the last 8 years, I've had the privilege of working with over 1,000 different customers around the world. And I'm privileged to work alongside the former CIOs of McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Department of Homeland Security and a few others. And really, as we share and listen to customers and we share with a high degree of experiential empathy, what I'm hearing time and time again over the years, as customers like you have used AWS, actually is rather familiar. So that was a little bit sarcastic. As we'd say in the UK, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But this is the reality that you and many customers face, that the frustration of your upbringing, of becoming about being successful, being innovative, and slowly over time as you add processes, which are a good thing, surely, then things start to slow down. And they struggle to get out of their own way in this journey. These organizations were once fueled by that scrappy desire to innovate. It propelled them to success. But these bureaucratic processes have now grown to suffer that. And really, this moment of change, this prolific, unrelenting change that we're going through, it really is now time to wake up. And the conversations I've had just in the last month, the last 2 months, with the change swirling around us, really are making leadership teams and executive committees and boards realize that this really is the time to seize the moment. And one of the things that has been around for a long time, which we actually don't talk about too much right now, is quantum computing. Now, we've been developing and looking at how to do this for a few decades now. But finally, there is light at the end of the tunnel. In Amazon, we've actually released a quantum computing chip, and we're a little bit shy about it while we go through the proofing that's required, and others are doing this. But we're close. It's close. And if you actually look at some of the things that we've done, such as releasing quantum-proof encryption algorithms in conjunction with NIST and working with them closely, when you look at some of the customers that are doing this, like Goldman Sachs with Amazon's Bracket solution, and then you start to look at, actually, if we can just get 1,000 qubits together, then maybe we have a chance to truly synthesize photosynthesis. Like, how do plants get nearly 100% of photovoltaic energy into chemical energy when the best photovoltaic panels we've got can do 37%? Like, we don't know how that works. And to be honest with you, if we tried to solve that with classical computing, we'd be here literally until the end of time. The same for nitrogen extraction in the atmosphere. Now, this was solved quite a while ago, yet it's incredibly energy intensive. Now, just imagine if we can break through and solve the energy challenge, solve the food crisis. It's close, but also imagine that disruption and potentially that uncertainty that Jason talked about coming along. And then when you look at digital twins, now the cost to replicate, instead of using atoms, which are very expensive, we can now use bits to simulate and improve operational efficiency, test concepts before we do them. One of our customers, Bosch, has made extraordinary gains in using that. And of course, what presentation would be complete without these words on the screen? Yes, as Jason made a very eloquent joke about those new models, yes, generative AI truly is affecting. I myself, when I reflect in conversations, are using it about an hour a day now as I research different elements in the course of my journey. And while these innovative technologies are happening right now, are just around the corner, the foundation for you as executives has got to be there. It's got to be in place. And this is where Amazon's unrelenting focus on security, which will forever be job zero, as we like to call about it, because of course we start counting at zero in IT, and followed by operational excellence, is at the heart of that. So yes, when we look back from those customers that have migrated, we see they reduced their costs by up to 66%. And yes, of course, the ability to have those services, those common services available in 36 regions, each with 3 availability zones, and all those regions in Amazon look very different from others that claim to have regions, along with the impact of reducing your carbon footprint. Moving to cloud, on average, improves your carbon footprint by 3.6 times when compared with the North American median. So yes, getting this right allows you to then focus on the transformation, of which we spend 1.85 trillion annually. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money being spent, and sadly, a lot of it wasted. I find it really interesting that turning constraints into catalysts is one of the most impactful things. And why on earth have I got a picture of a goldfish on the screen? Well, what we see happening is that things grow to consume the space available to them, much like a goldfish will grow to the size of its tank. Now, this was first observed post-World War II, when the USA, of course, had the largest navy in the world, easily surpassing the British Navy, which had been supreme, apparently, for 100 years, shrank massively, the British Navy did. And interestingly, a gentleman called Cyril Northcote Parkinson observed a really interesting effect. As the British Navy sank its ships, the number of admirals grew. What do we know this now as? Parkinson's law. Tasks expand to fill the available time allocated to them. And it's really frightening when you look at this. They grow at 5 to 7%. Just think about that. The bureaucracy in your business grew 5 to 7% annually while you slept last night. That's frightening. And we know this. For any of us that have upsized a house, what do? You fill it. You expand to fill it. This is just how we humans tend to operate. And we have got to relentlessly look at this. Because what happens when you have a project? Well, that project will hit a challenge. So what do as executives? More time, more money, more everything. Come on, we've got to break through this challenge. And on we go. And the scope has now grown. And we hit another challenge. What do? More time, more people, more everything, and on and on and on. Now, whether in the desire for us to be more agile in the last 15 years, well, the reality is most people are wagile. They're stuck between waterfall and agile. That's a sad truth, and I've been there, I've lived that. It's hard work. And the other realization in the last 8 years at Amazon is that actually those customers that go the slowest are the ones that have the most money and the most resources. And that's frightening. Right, we've got to really turn this round. And we've got to see constraints as accelerators. It's fascinating to me that as executives, that first week of COVID, how fast decisions were made. It's fascinating to me that when I had a Sev 1 crisis, suddenly the checkbook opened and I had suddenly near unlimited money available to me. It's fascinating to me that when constraints are injected, whether it's a data center migration or an extinction level event for your business, suddenly people are focused. And I would say one of my biggest learnings is you've got to almost take things away. I know one customer who has frozen their headcount. They've frozen their headcount. And when managers come for more headcount, the CEO turns around and goes, I'll give you some tokens. Now, is that the right idea? I'm not sure. Personally, I don't like the idea of not planting seeds and hiring the next generation continually. I think we have a responsibility as executives to do that. But effectively using constraints is a really, really powerful catalyst. And by the way, as we're going along, we probably should think about our language here. I mean, who amongst us really wants to be disrupted, transformed, or change managed? Not many of us. Except as executives, when I moved to Amazon, one of the biggest things I wanted to know was that I would have the autonomy to execute towards the goals, which of course had been discussed, not be micromanaged. Turns out humans are all the same in that regard, broadly. We need to move towards this world of ownership, of clarity, of curiosity. And again, we only own the right to exist in that space when the foundations are right, when we are secure, when we are being operationally excellent. If we don't have that, we have no remit amongst our executive committee colleagues to talk about innovation because it'll slap us metaphorically around the face. And I've lived that dream, or nightmare. So we've got to act. And what I want to do is share 9 lessons learned and give you a bit of a double-click opportunity offline as well. And we've broken these down into 3 different sections. Elevate, where we're looking at what organizations are capable of by embracing rapid adaptation over these bureaucratic barriers. We're going to look at Energize, where we're going to equip our teams with the right skills. And we're going to look at Envision. How do we actually define that purposeful way, that direction of where we're going as leaders? So from vision to action, what are some practical steps forward? And let's start with Elevate. And let's look at a story that some of you might know already very well. The Enigma machine had 159 million combinations to it. It had to be cracked into 24 hours. I'm sure nearly every person in the room has heard of this story. What's interesting to me is I was actually in Poland last week, just outside of Warsaw. And I was speaking to some of the government, and they educated me on the fact that prior to Alan Turing and the team at Bletchley Park taking over this task, in Poland there was 3 mathematicians working in a small team from the early 1930s who actually embraced, they had no budget, but they actually replicated the Enigma machine and did the early pioneering work. And prior to World War II breaking out, they met with British and French intelligence and handed over all their material, knowing that their time was limited. And that was then picked up and driven forward. Small teams innovating on impossible tasks, moving forward. Almost like a rebel alliance to continue the metaphor from the starting point. And they did it, again, in a small team. They did it with mathematicians, linguists, and crossword puzzle experts. Experts with very different skills coming together. They can do it. You can absolutely do it in your teams. And this world of APIs that we have from cloud infrastructure and the new emerging model context protocol from generative AI, which is incredibly exciting to empower teams to move forward, is really interesting. But the truth is, most organizations need to break their budget gridlock. Prior to moving to cloud, 70 to 80% of my budget was on run the engine. 70 to 80%. And by the way, of that 70 to 80%, that final 20%, well, in a regulated entity, maybe 15% of that 20% is going to go to regulatory compliance, leaving here with 5% to talk about innovation with your executive committee colleagues. Never has that been as a constrained conversation as ever before when you're arguing over what that 5% is doing. So we've got to break away from that. And never in my history of my career have I seen moving to cloud fully and embracing those APIs and breaking out of those technology silos being more important. That legacy debt and compliance is such a drain on what you do, and these silos will still exist unless you break them. So a few methods for you to unlock that innovation capital. I do know of customers moving to zero-based technology budgeting right now. Now, there's going to be a series of about 9 QR codes presented to you. You don't have to scan this right now. You can take a picture of this screen, though, and in your photo library app afterwards, double-click on the QR code, and it will take you to the link. And behind this QR code is a link, a small 8-minute read written by a colleague of mine called Chris Hennessy. And Chris was the Chief Financial Officer of Technology at Capital One. We learned a lot of lessons at Capital One moving forward in this way. So take a picture of this, double-click if you want to go deeper on this. FinOps does matter. Empowerment of teams does matter. Making teams realize the cost of the resources really matters. And experimenting and putting together, I used to give $1,000 of credits to a team to go and test an idea. Incredibly important. And when we look at today's speed paradox, I do see huge challenges on what do I federate and what do I centralize still. And as an executive, I know there's almost a need to centralize. And typically my knee-jerk control to centralize was because of control. I want control. This doesn't feel right, I'm going to centralize it. The actual and comfortable truth is, moving to a horizontal function should be when it's for speed and efficiency. Speed and efficiency is what you need to be focusing on. And this is really hard. Let's not underestimate, by the way, how hard this is. Centralized functions, though, they create bottlenecks. And we see this time and time again. Years ago, when people would set up a Cloud Center of Excellence team, what would happen to that team? Within about 8 weeks, it'll become a bottleneck for the entire organization, right? And the same's going to happen, by the way, with generative artificial intelligence and digital twins and quantum computing if we don't obsess about the scaling of that. So really, you've got to decentralize. This is the default model now. This is the default model, keeping teams close to their customers. And the big one that we've spent years working on, especially for regulated industry, is automating the guardrails. Because I know, as an executive, you don't want teams to mess up. Of course you don't. And by the way, as a former engineer, I have made my fair share of mistakes. I once unplugged a mainframe's Ethernet cable for 7 hours, right? I wish somebody had had a guardrail that say, hey, you just unplugged something you shouldn't have done. So these guardrails at a code level can now guide engineers to do the right thing while still giving them the relevant permissions for what they need to do. That QR code, by the way, was written by, the blog underneath it was written by Mark Schwartz, who was the former CIO of the Department of Immigration for Homeland Security, a truly bureaucratic organization, which he managed to change massively as they went to cloud. And the next thing here, by the way, when leadership teams get together, and I think many leadership teams have figured out they do need a mission statement, they do need a North Star, and very often they spend a lot of time putting their values out there. The truth of the matter is, whether we like it or not, is values are not actionable. Now, you will have your personal values, you probably have corporate values, but they are rarely ever used to provide a decision-making way for your business. Far, far better to define your principles, and it's not easy, by the way. It's not easy to define your principles. And we've written, again, a blog. Now, why am I talking about principles? Because time and time again, when we look at principles, or you want to make a decision, there's problems. When I used to run design review for my division at Cap One, I used to get extremely frustrated when architects, principal engineers, very talented individuals would come and they'd literally spent 6 months researching the worst, least bad option, as they used to call it, for a technology choice. And they would look at everything when actually as a leadership team, we'd made some very specific technology choices, one of them being which cloud provider we wanted to use. Yet if we hadn't said principles like, we would like you to use AWS if blocked, bring us that challenge, well, unless you declare that, people aren't going to go off. They're going to look at every possible option and waste a lot of time. I mean, you may have heard of the Amazon leadership principles. These 16 leadership principles, we recruit relentlessly for high judgment in these. And they are naturally in contention with each other. So if we've got a bias for action in the middle there, well, that's great, but what about insisting on the highest standards and delivering results? Surely they're in contention. Well, yes, they are. And we recruit relentlessly for that high judgment to be able to apply these leadership principles into situations. But I will tell you, what I'm seeing is small teams have won. And this is so true for generative artificial intelligence. I had the privilege of meeting with the executive committee of one of the world's biggest banks last week, and they have had this epiphany. They have now had this epiphany that one of the principles that they need to put into effect is if you build it, you support it. Finally, that's breaking up their waterfall stroke agile to truly realize that it needs a combination of technology experts, business folks, ideally with a leader who can drive them together, that needs to build, support, and iterate, because models change. Prompts can change. Data can change. The regression testing is now going to be continual. So this is where we are at. Let's move on to Energize. If we look back at this beautiful image, and you think of Thomas Edison in 1876, who stands in the middle of a lab filled with engineers, machinists, and chemists, his loyal team of innovators. Edison knew that breakthroughs don't come from one person alone. A bit like a rebel alliance, Edison's teams weren't just employees, they were creators, driven by a shared vision of transforming the future. Incredibly important to them. And these innovators worked tirelessly. There was no rigid hierarchies or narrow roles. Edison's lab became a worldwide powerhouse because he empowered his team to learn by doing, to take ownership, and to believe their part of the mission was truly, truly important. Now, here's a question you might want to ask yourself. Who has the power to say no in your business? Chief Information Security Officer? Chief Risk Officer? General Counsel? I bet you're thinking of many people right now. Who has the power to say yes? Now, I know, as a former CTO leading this journey, that the ability for me to look at all things considered as a first-line officer and make the right, no BS call on whether something's a risk or not a risk is incredibly, incredibly important. To get to yes is where we need to be getting for. Where have you got decision bottlenecks? Because your organization will only move at the speed of its slowest decision. Its slowest decision. So these approval processes need to be really looked at and exchanged for guardrails. And these dependencies, you need to start treating them as defects. And that's something I find really interesting at Amazon that's taught me is Amazon sees all these technical and team bottlenecks as defects. How are we going to manage them appropriately? How are we going to distribute that autonomy, accelerate that? And what we see working time and time again is when you can create a team with a focused, single-threaded leader, somebody who gets full ownership. And for these teams to operate successfully and safely in conjunction, specifically if you're a regulated entity, then yes, spending time on the guardrails, working with us to help get that right and bring from the thousands of customers who have helped do that is how you're going to make sure these folks can innovate safely. None of us want to be on the end of that phone call when something has gone very bad and we've got an incident. It is draining to the extreme. And I think one of the things we've got to get better at as we create these teams is I think we've all got to collectively get better at feedback. Why is it that feedback often feels like a corporate colonoscopy? It's painful, right? We know as leaders, we praise in public, we coach in private, but there's so much more. Look, I remember when I was going through the journey, one of the worst mistakes I made. I mean, let's be honest. You're all leaders. You're busy from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day, triple booked, running from crisis to fire. You've carved out some precious time to be here today, which we greatly appreciate. I remember one such incident. It was a demo. The teams had been working really hard for 30 days to demo something to me, and I decided not to be there. Wow, what a mistake. They were crushed. And I got both barrels of feedback, quite justifiably so, that I deprioritized the team demo. So feedback's got to go both ways. We've got to be open to receiving it, and we've surely got to double down, triple down on being able to give that feedback. And my colleague Phil LeBrun, who was the CIO at McDonald's for 26 years, has wrote a really interesting blog on how you can take some action, how you and your executive committee colleagues can act to make this a better experience for all of us as we move forward. And alongside that feedback culture, and don't worry, there's going to be a summary QR code at the end you can take a picture of to get to all these blogs. We've got to get better at training. Like the days of classroom training, sadly, are behind us. This has changed. Now, I've shared my own personal sort of learning journey at Cap One, who I think have been really successful at scaling this to thousands of engineers being certified. One of the major things that my alma mater figured out was making this actually adult gamification with the respectfulness that we as adults demand. So, and the way that that took effect, by the way, we realized that passing the AWS exams, I didn't even know what the AWS exams were when I started the journey, but passing the AWS exams became really important as a quality mark. It became like a driving license for using cloud. And we started with an internal intranet as, hey, who's passed? Then it's like, what exams have you passed? Who's passed more? What percentages? And suddenly, you've got 1,000 people that are competing on which exams they can pass. So this gamification, this skilling, hugely important. Again, two of the most powerful things I did was pair programming. So bringing in experts to work with your teams. We as humans, if we're doing something together, we learn best when following others and we can ask questions. Now, as you've probably gathered, I'm British. I will not ask an embarrassing question on a training course. But if I'm sitting with somebody and I'm pair programming, I will ask questions and we will learn together. So this has changed. So transform your approach with gamification. And again, this QR code leads to a blog where the team have put some really solid actions you can take as leaders to accelerate this so that your small teams are fully empowered. Because really, as humans, that ownership, that curiosity, that mastery, that clarity is really important. If you want to go deeper, by the way, on this topic, Daniel Pink has written an amazing book called Drive. And in that book, he talks about 3 things that motivate most humans. And those are mastery, purpose, and ownership. Autonomy, rather, sorry. Very, very important. Moving on to the final one, envision. I think we've all got to get better, even in this uncertainty, of placing some bets in where we want to go. And there's a really fascinating story that one of our customers has educated us on. In 1993, Samsung was known for its cheap, low-quality electronics with less than 1% of global market share. And everything changed when Chairman Lee Kun-hee visited a store in Frankfurt, Germany. Seeing Samsung products hidden in the back of the store, he asked why. And the retailer's response was brutal. Samsung products are for poor people. Ouch. Ouch. And that moment sparked one of business history's most dramatic transformations. After a legendary 3-day emergency meeting, Lee set Samsung on a new path. The ultimate symbol? At their Gumi factory in South Korea, workers gathered to watch $50 million of products burn in a bonfire. A bold declaration that mediocre quality would no longer be tolerated. Out went rigid hierarchies, in came global talent, engineers were sent worldwide. Design centers sprouted across 3 continents. And as we look back at Samsung, things changed. Within a decade, through that relentless focus on innovation and excellence, Samsung transformed from bargain bin merchant through to a global technology leader. And it stands as a powerful reminder for us that with a bold vision, a decisive action, even the most entrenched business can be reimagined. And when we look at entrenched processes, has anything more entrenched than ITIL? Like, this came from the British government. So I feel partially responsible. But when you look at the heart of it, some of these things, like having a change record, like understanding and having a great instant process, yeah, okay, they make sense. But boy, have we overcooked it. Boy, has this created the business and IT. And I will tell you personally, I hate that term. I detest it. As an IT leader or a business leader in this room, what part of technology does not impact you? Everything does. So we've got to actually be bold and break free, and we've got to transfer from this idea of IT order taker to business partner. And that's where I see both cloud and generative IT coming together. Generative AI coming together to finally realize that small teams are going to win. They've got to have a principle to use undifferentiated heavy lifting to remove the bits they don't need to do. To focus on those things which truly differentiate you from your competitors and delight your customers. Truly, truly important. And by the way, as we know, there's never enough time. Never enough time. It took me a long time to realize that multitasking does not work. I watched the documentary on The Miracle of the Hudson, Sully Sullenberg. I watched an interview with him recently. And he was talking about, in that I think it was 2 minutes, 50 seconds or something of like peak decision making, he knew that multitasking was a scientific fallacy. That we can attempt to context switch as humans, but only when we monotask on task after task do you get through it. And that's exactly what he did as he was trying to land that plane on the Hudson. Yeah, I know as a junior engineer, I thought I could multitask. So one of the lessons we've got to learn is that that doesn't work, and we've got to teach that. Because if you have a team of 5 or 6 people working in a team, and maybe 4 of them are busy, or 5 of them are busy working on that monotask, what does the 6th person do? They start a new project, right? Of course they do. Then they distract their teammates as they're trying to get through it. So we've got to be relentlessly insistent on implementing work in progress limits. We've got to focus on completing, not starting. And that requires discipline. It requires us to be teachers with our teams, and often teachers with ourselves, as we're fighting with our calendars from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day, firefighting, as I know you have to. And we've got to go from this bureaucracy, ready to break through from these long development cycles. I mean, I'll tell you, I speak to a lot of boards right now. Not many of them are going, yeah, let's have a $500 million program. That sounds exciting. No. It's not what they're looking for. These long development cycles miss market opportunities. And we've got to bust through that fear of experimentation and change. And the way to do that, in my experience, again, focus on these 30-day sprints. Focus on a few $100s or a few $1,000s of credits. Let a team prove an idea. Come back to you, do the demo. And if it doesn't work, have the boldness to go, no, that didn't work. We're going to disband that. We're going to try something else. Because that's what we now have available to us. That is the power of the AWS cloud. That is the power with these generative AI projects that are coming through. And by the way, on generative AI, if you're spending time trying to work out NPV or ROI at the start of these experiments, I would boldly say you're wasting your time. You need to focus on attention. You need to focus on attention. You need to focus on, and the first wave of generative AI is absolutely operational efficiency, but the really exciting things are coming through the other side. These 30-day sprints to prove it is how you're going to win. But recognize not all of them are going to be successful, and that's okay. Because transformation isn't about having unlimited resources or unlimited money. It just isn't right now. It is about ambition. It is about being bold. So please take these 3 elements: elevate, energize, envision. Here's the summary. If you want to take a picture of this slide, this QR code will get you to all of the other QR codes if you need to. They've all got very purposeful, executive-written guidance written by other executives for you to take away and action. So to continue the metaphor, be different. Be a rebel. Experiment, encourage, and move forward, and survive and thrive in this uncertainty that is swirling around us.